Welcome to ReExamined Reads, the Star Trek edition. On this episode, we'll take a look at how Star Trek novels are evaluated and the ranking system used to rate each one. First, let's look at the three criteria for a good Star Trek novel: canon, plot, including subplots and plot twists, and characters. Canon in the Star Trek universe takes on 5 parts: authors who keep to it, those who wrote before canon was established, those who ignore it, stories that don't have to deal with it, and finally anything to do with Abrams and Discovery. The authors who keep and respect it will always get a positive checkmark when their work is reviewed. Only in rare circumstances can you get around not sticking to canon and produce a good Star Trek work. The second group is those who produced novels before canon was established. In the 1960s and 70s, up until about 1979, there was no established canon. The later movies, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise were still years away. These works may be presented in a not canon, but still a good or bad read circumstance. Those who blatantly ignore canon had better have a good excuse, or the chances of getting a favorable review diminish considerably. A work that doesn't hold to canon means you may be dealing with an author who wasn't writing this book for the love of the genre, but because they were trying to turn a quick buck. There are a surprising number of these novels. The fourth group is the rare instance where the author doesn't have to deal with any sort of canon, in the instance of, say, alternate timelines or the mirror universe. These will be examined through the lens of plausible more than canon. The fifth group is the J.J. Abrams and Discovery rewrites. So what's wrong with Discovery and Abrams? Let me start with the Abrams rewrites. I objected to redoing the story of the original Enterprise crew. There are quite literally millions of stories that could be told in the Star Trek universe, yet for some reason the producers and writers felt they needed to remake the original series. That's just lazy and formulaic. Abrams destroyed canon and timelines in the first movie, and in the second, trying to redo The Wrath of Khan was in my mind akin to trying to remake The Godfather or Citizen Kane. Even making the attempt was presumptuous, and in the end there should have been a lesson there in humility, but clearly one didn't get through. Now, if reports are to be believed, Chris Pine isn't coming back, and that third movie will be the last. So they brought the franchise back, destroyed everything, and everyone's just going to move on. Those involved have made their money, and that sort of hit and run to make a quick buck nonsense doesn't deserve to be remembered in the same breath as the last 50 years of Trek. As for Discovery, the writing is awful, canon was disregarded even more than in the movies, and some of the characters are just plain unlikable. The one and only bright spot in that entire disaster was Michelle Yeoh's character, or characters if you will, and performance. They really should have thought about a series revolving around her as captain. They shouldn't have made it a prequel, but that ship has sailed. So let's move on to plots, subplots, and plot twists. There are certain plot twists that will be examined with extra scrutiny. Those involving the Borg, time travel, and the mirror universe. Any story about the Borg that doesn't treat them with the ferocity and power they deserve is, in my opinion, a bad story. Now, while you can't write a story where the Borg are so powerful they destroy all the main characters and the Federation, an author has to make them formidable and realistic, not just watered-down versions to suit the plotline. A good plotline was Scorpion, where the Borg needed something they couldn't get by assimilation. A bad Borg episode was Descent, where the writers in the end made the Borg seem laughable. Time travel is another plot twist that, when well done, can be exceptional. Take the episodes All of Our Yesterdays and City on the Edge of Forever. Both very well done. Put those against the formulaic Stormfront, and you see how quick it gets gimmicky. Moving on to the mirror universe, there have been a few works that have been great. There are almost an equal number that have been awful. The Deep Space Nine episode The Emperor's New Cloak is the first one that comes to mind in the awful department, and one of the best, still a Deep Space Nine episode, was Crossover. My overall point is that if you're going to take one of these 3 plot twists and make it part of your story, make the effort and save them for when the story is great. If you don't, the fans are going to hate you for it. As for the other type of plots, make them believable and leave the melodrama behind. Sometimes they are just way over the top, and at that point, the believability factor drops. The final qualification for writing for Star Trek is characters. When an author writes characters doing something out of character, you spoil the whole read. For example, I point out in my review of Blackfire that the Enterprise suffers massive damage and is essentially hauled back to a starbase in 2 pieces. Scotty chooses that moment to go out on a mission. I'm not buying that. We all know Scotty. We've had decades of character development, and his leaving at that point in any story would be so far out of character that it's just absurd. Keep to canon, write great plots, stick with characters, make it interesting, and you have 3/4 of a good read. This brings us to the rating system. 1 star is a work that isn't worth your time or money. It's best to avoid these works as they are so bad they can sour you on all future Star Trek books, and that would be a shame. A 2-star rating means that there is some value in this work, but only in part. There are times when you'll find yourself skipping over the more boring subplots and focusing on just the ones that you find interesting. To use Deep Space Nine as an analogy, when I'm watching that last season over and over again, I tend to skip over the subplot involving Gul Dukat and Kai Wynn going to the fire caves. Why? I just don't care. I got this the first time, and I just want the action and adventure. That doesn't mean the episodes aren't worth rewatching, but just parts of them. A 3-star rating is ambiguous. There are stories out there that are well written and characters and canon are up to par, but aspects of the story just aren't for me. For example, Price and Fate of the Phoenix. Not a bad piece of work, it meets all the criteria of a good book, but it's one of the 3 types of Star Trek novels that I like the least. The pseudo-romance novel. It is my opinion that there are 3 types of novels. Action-adventure, which is best described as hit the bad guy, kiss the girl, save the day. Really my type of Trek. The second is character development, where missing parts of the lives of our favorite characters are filled in. An example of this type of work is The Lost Years, which chronicles the years between the end of the Enterprise's first mission and the events of the motion picture, or Sarek, which explains how the relationship soured between Spock and his father after it had been patched up in Journey to Babel. These can be interesting, and at times essential, in expanding your view of the Trek universe. The third, and there are a lot of these, pseudo-romance novels concerning the main characters, usually Spock or Kirk. These tend to introduce a female character, and one of the two falls for them. Now, these aren't necessarily bad, but they can be written with more flair than I like. For example, Spock takes a wound to his arm, and when his shirt comes off, you get lines like, "His bulging, well-toned and sun-kissed arm flexed as the hypo pressed against his skin." Instead of my type of Star Trek, which is, McCoy grumbled and jammed the hypo into Spock's arm and told him to hold still. You can see the differences. So while that 3-star rating doesn't mean it's a bad book, it's just one that different types of fans might like better than I do, and I don't want my personal bias to cloud an otherwise well-written work. 4 stars is an enjoyable read, one that was worth every minute, but you did it once and won't do it again. You recommend the book, and if you loan it out to someone and you don't get it back, well, that's no big deal. 5 stars is a book that you read, love, and put back on your shelf to pick up again one day. I have several novels like that, which have lingered for decades on my shelf. One day you see it, pick it up, and find yourself rereading it. When done, it goes right back in its place. There is no higher honor for a good book. In conclusion, I'd like to say this is a work of passion. Reading Star Trek novels isn't such a bad sideline, and the ability to bring some of these older and almost unknown works back into the modern Star Trek discussion is my pleasure. Leave your comments on this episode and suggestions for Star Trek novels you'd like to see reviewed below. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at ReExamined Reads. If you really enjoyed this presentation, after you like and subscribe, send a link of this channel to your favorite Star Trek fan. It would be much appreciated. And as always, thank you for watching.